ultimately cost this village $280,000 of revenue every year since it went down by that vote. If you want to check on the auditor side, I can assure you that you can go and get your actual what you paid in taxes for the village, and you'll be able to see that everybody in our village actually got a tax cut and has enjoyed that every year since 2021. Most of the time, you will have renewals passed very easily because they do not raise taxes. I know there's people in the audience that was here, sat with me during that year, and there was efforts to get the mayor at that time to do some communication. That those efforts were ignored. Excuse me. We're here tonight to do better, to answer your questions, listen to your concerns, and explain how this levy supports services our residents rely on every day. So the first question comes down, what does the levy support? This levy is not about adding new expenses. It's about preserving the foundational services that keeps Cleve safe, clean, and functioning. It pays for police and fire. These are basic services critical to everyday life, and this levy helps sustain them without relying on unsustainable budget cuts or temporary patches. We're also interested in providing our village residents with responsible government and fulfilling our promises. During the 2023 mayoral campaign, I pledged that we would improve communication and get serious about enforcing our ordinances and zoning regulations. From 2021 through 2023, enforcement wasn't possible, not because there was a lack of leadership, and it wasn't due to the fact that the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department was here. Some people think that. I'm here to tell you tonight it has nothing to do with our Sheriff's Department. They are doing a very commendable job, and we thank them for it, but they are only authorized to enforce Ohio Revised Code. They cannot and do not enforce village ordinances. In response, your council acted swiftly and responsibly. We have restored a small footprint of Village Police Department, and we met with the Sheriff's Department today just to make sure the lines of communication are where they need to be. We have restored our Mayor's Court and Property Maintenance Court. We've reinstated the Board of Zoning Appeals. All of those were not meeting from 2021 through 2024. And we installed our local police authority this year at a cost of about $60,000, a very small investment to ensure public safety and support of enforcement of quality of life ordinances. We have corrected the village's failure to comply with the Ohio EPA stormwater regulations dating back to 2015 and are now fully compliant for the first time since the village withdrew from the Hamilton County Stormwater District. These actions reflect our commitment to good governance and follow through on our promises. You may be asking yourself, why does a village matter? I believe it does matter. I think every member of council believes it matters. I'm hoping our citizens also believe that it matters. So we're talking tonight about why it matters. One of the great strengths of being a village as opposed to a township is our flexibility. Villages like Cleves can pass ordinance tailored specifically to our community. Townships without home rule powers do not have that authority. Cleves covers about 1.5 square miles. That makes your local government truly local. All of us live here. You can and do reach out to us directly. And when you do, your voice isn't lost in the bureaucracy. It's heard, and we do our best to respond quickly. We also operate our own court system, which enables us to handle cases more efficiently rather than sending residents downtown to municipal court. The fiscal reality that we face is somewhat grim, which we'll talk more about it later. Essential services like police and fire cannot be cut. we are legally required and mandated to maintain them at a level our residents deserve. That leaves us with one path forward. We must continue to spend, but we must spend wisely. According to projections from the auditor's office, the village is expected to deplete its funds by 2029 without additional revenue. This would have implications beyond financial figures. If we were ever forced to dissolve, the burden would shift to Miami Township. While the increase to your tax bill might be small, and I want to emphasize, there will be an increase for our residents. I've spoken extensively to the auditor's office and compared the two. It's not much, but even with the levy, if the village puts it on and it is approved, it'll still be less than Miami Township. So our residents really gain absolutely nothing, okay? But they have a lot to stand to lose. Your voice matters. I appreciate you being here. Tonight is not a final decision. It's about a conversation. We are here to give you facts, to answer your questions, and to ensure that any steps we take reflect your priorities and values. Thank you for your time, your trust, and your continued commitment to making Cleves a better place for everyone who calls it home. I do want to draw your attention just for a second in your packet. You should have the levy results from 2021. It looks something like this. Okay, it's not a big report. This comes directly off of the website down at the Board of Elections. You can go back every year and figure out exactly what the votes were. And you can see there were only 400 ballots that took place that year. A very, very small amount. 18%, a little bit over 18% of our public voted in that election. And yet there was only 3 votes. Just a little communication probably would have made the difference. Based on the information I have, and I think they'll talk more about this, there's even with a levy that we're suggesting, the increase isn't going to give us much more than what we would have had if that levy had never failed. So I want to emphasize that because those are facts that we can prove. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Ozer, and then Linda Bolton, who is our chairperson for the Finance Committee, will take over from there and tell you a little bit more about the discussions we've had in finance and why we're looking at different levies for that purpose. So Cindy, could you?
I'll start and then Justin, because Justin and I have been working a lot on this. So so when I came in last year, we have to put in a forecast, 5-year forecast. We have to turn that in. So at our next meeting, we'll have a public meeting at 5:45 about, all the funds. And so last year when I first came in and pulled this up, I knew you guys really didn't need a levy right away. We talked about this. So I did this forecast last year and I'm like, 29 finance, we've met every month, and I'm like, guys, I have 29, 30, you're gonna be out of money. They're losing about 300,000 a year. You gotta remember, revenue kind of stays the same. We're not bringing more revenue in, and expenditures, what do? They go up. Salaries, insurance, 8-10%. So, and then our contracts, the fire contract, the village fire contract went up tremendously. And we don't, police levy or the police contract, I think we're talking in the future of that going up. So there's a lot of things that are happening that, I know Chuck and I in the finance committee, we talked about last year that we kind of knew something was going to have to happen. So, have,
Can I interject this for one
Yeah,
second? Cindy?
yeah.
What you may not realize is Jim Brett, who was our fiscal officer last year, projected that we would be completely out of money by 2016. I'm sorry, 2026. I'm going back in time, back to the past, I guess. 2026. And Cindy, through her diligent efforts, was able to give us very accurate information. But I also want to make you aware of the fact that we're probably close to $63,000 of unpaid bills that we had to make up out of this last fiscal year. So we really have been trying as a council to manage your money well.
I agree with that. I agree. Justin, you want to add, is anything else? Linda, is there anything else that you?
Well, I mean, when it gets turned over to me, I'll.
Okay. Do you want to add about your reports, or do you?
Ms. Bolton, it's up to you if you'd like to go first. My report's going to talk about the proposed millage, and I think maybe before we do that, if you want to take
Well,
the floor.
yeah, I would just say that a couple things. A lot of emphasis has been put on the levy that failed in 21. But the village came back 2 more times to try to get that levy passed, and it failed both times. So we've made 3 attempts, or the previous administration made 3 attempts to try to get this levy passed. The first time it was a renewal, and when it went down, every levy after that is a new levy. Okay? Even though it's the same, maybe the same millage you asked for before, but once that renewal fails, everything you put on is a new levy. So 3 times we've gone to the residents, or the previous administration has gone to the residents. And it is clear, the reason we're asking, okay, we debated general fund levy, safety levy, street levy, how do we want to justify this and sell it to our residents? The fire and police contract alone simplifies this whole discussion. I can throw all kinds of numbers at you, all kinds of budget numbers at you, but the reality is we are currently paying about $300,000 out of the general fund to supplement the fire and police contracts. We have 2 continuing levies on the books for very small amounts, but they don't cover the cost. So this is a safety levy for a reason, because it's going to cover the police and fire contracts that every resident in this state, no matter what community they live in, whether it be Green Township, City of Cheviot, Delhi, wherever you live, your main thing you're paying for local taxes is police and fire. And that's what we're asking for here. No fluff, I mean, this is going to pay the basic contracts for police and fire. And after a year or 2, we'll probably still be supplementing something, but not to the extent that we supplement now. And if we run out of money, it's going to be because of those contracts. Not because of anything we've done or any excessive spending that we've done. It's because the cost of those services has risen, and we haven't found a way to get the money that we need to pay for those services. So it's very simple in my mind. We're asking you to help pay for your police and fire protection. It will free up money out of the general fund, which will allow us to do more improvements in the village, to do more things that we have in mind to do that we can't do now, because we just can't spend the money knowing that if we don't pass a levy, we're not going to have it. So we debated at the couple last finance meetings, different possible millages, and we've asked the Hamilton County auditors to certify 3 figures for us. One would be figures for a 3.5 safety levy, a 4 mil safety levy, and a 4.5 safety levy. Now this will be on the ballot as a new levy, because it's new. So they certified those amounts for us. We've got them before us. Everybody's sitting here and has these in front of them. The difference between them isn't a huge amount of money. but we have to talk and debate and come up with a decision as to, what we think makes the most sense for our residents. The 3.5 millage will bring in 291,000 approximately. The 4 new millage will bring in 333, and the 4.5 would bring in 375. Only an $80,000 a year difference between 3.5 and 4.5, which is what our 1 mill is worth in the village of Cleveland, about 82,000. So the debate amongst council is going to be which of these 3 options we think is in the best interest of our residents. This is a first step in putting any levy on the ballot. You have to ask the county auditors to estimate and certify the amount of money they believe you will bring in. And we've done that. We've got those estimates. So now it's just a debate amongst residents and council on how to move forward. I think we do have to vote on it on the meeting in July, right?
We do, and I'll just skip ahead to the next steps. I'm not gonna go through all the next steps, but in my discussion with the auditor's office, I've already drafted up a resolution for the July 9th meeting.
Okay.
And we will have to have another meeting in the month of July to get it down to the Board of Elections in time. So we're gonna have to, in the next step section, set a date for that.
So the deadline is August, so we have to make a decision and be ready to and prepared to get it on the ballot by August 6th.
Yeah. That's correct.
So we're here to hear what you guys have to say. Currently, how much is the general fund subsidizing right now for our police and fire?
Right, what do we know?
This year, our general fund, this is excluding communication center fees, fuel, and some of those other incidentals. The contracts alone, our general fund supplements safety services by $210,000 this year. Just in the contracts alone, not including the fuel or vehicles, electric, things of that nature. Next
But
year,
the contracts go up every year, especially the fire, correct?
yes, and I have that breakdown if you'd like me to.
No, I'm a firm believer in keeping things simple and not complicating things more than they need to be complicated. We'll answer any questions that anybody has. But yeah, I mean, to me, you are covering your police and fire with this levy. Over 4 years, 5 years, what is the levy?
It'll be a 5-year.
5-year levy. And that's what we're projecting will be in trouble in 5 years. 229, 230. This levy will take us to there. So it gives us time to also evaluate all the other things that we really want to do to help our residents. Things that are important, street repairs. I'm really anxious to get a street program going. But when you're looking at the numbers we're looking at now, it's difficult to justify where that goes, especially when our contribution toward any street repair can be anywhere from 80,000 to $1 million. So I don't know what else I can say. If anybody's got questions of me, I'm happy to answer them. I can now let Justin fill in any information he feels is important to share.
And once he's done, we need to open.
Yes.
As Ms. Bolton stated, we've tossed numbers around from the 3.5 mil to 4 and 4.5. Ms. Oster and I have worked these numbers backwards, forwards in any way. At this point, our recommendation is a 4 mil safety levy to be placed on the ballot. To that point, with no current levy, we're set to go insolvent sometime late 29, definitely by 2030. With a 4 mil levy, we would still have in our general fund at the end of 2030 around $735,000, which is less than our annual operating expense, but it would carry us through 21 and then 2032 with this levy. So a 4 mil levy would build some residual in our account the first 2 years, as you stated, And then in year 3, 4, and 5, the general fund starts to encumber that again. And our general fund starts to deplete. There's a bar chart. Do you have that copy?
They all have it.
I believe everybody has this copy. So if you just take a look at this quickly, your blue chart here represents no new levy. And as you can see, in 2029, at the end of 2029, not counting inflation or other, purchases, we're around $200,000. And then by the end of 2030, we'll be at a negative of 161,000. So we certainly wouldn't make it through 2030 without any additional funding. And then in comparison here, the orange bar is where our fund balance would be with this formula levy. You can see at the end of 2030, we're right around $735,000.
Those are estimates.
Those are estimates based off of, inflation trends and also your controls are what we know we're going to pay for contracts. Now, when I talk about controls with our contracts, our sheriff's office contract that we executed this year is good through 2027. We don't know what our contract's going to be in 28 or 29. But we do know that it's going to increase like everything else. The sheriff's office operates on contracts of their own. So employee salaries are set to increase, insurance and uniforms and everything else. So, there will be inflation. We factored in some inflation in 28, 29, and 30, around 10% increase year over year, the sheriff's contract. Yeah, and I guess, I'm closing with this year, we paid $635,000 for safety service expenses. In 2030, that number will grow to $955,000. That's the trend of what safety services cost for any municipality. So, I could discuss the numbers all night, but I think it's best if we open the floor and I can use my information to answer the questions anyone has.
So, right now, before you start, I just want to read on the agenda: the Village of Please values community input, encourages participation. We welcome passionate viewpoints, but we ask all comments remain respectful and free of disruption. Our goal is to maintain a constructive and professional environment. We want to thank you for your cooperation. I think, Dan, you're going to sort of be the one that registers anybody who wants to speak. I don't know that we need to have fill something out, but if you want to talk tonight, I'd ask that you come to the podium, give us your first, last name, and your address, and we will record that into the record. This is almost like being back in the classroom.
Awesome.
No, I'm not going to call it. Surely there's some questions that you have.
I'll start. I have a question.
Come on forward.
Judy Flynn, 139 Harrison Avenue. I have a couple of questions. One question is about the police, the local ordinance. I didn't understand, why the Hamilton County Sheriff can't enforce the local ordinance. And what are they? What are we talking about? And how much do they pay the police?
Well, I'm going to let our marshal answer that question as far as what the pay and structure is. Lieutenant, I don't know if you want to make a statement as to that, or
Sheriff's Department enforces Ohio revised code. We don't enforce local ordinances such as, and I'm not saying there's no ordinance, but you're letting your grass get too long, parked out front too long, things that are against the Ohio revised code, but Leaves has put into the ordinance for their village that they do not want to have happen. Those are not enforceable by law.
So they have not been
Criminal
doing
law.
anything about that then? So
Who's that?
Hamilton County hasn't responded to
I mean,
any of that?
there's steps. So if, let's say it's an abandoned vehicle. If there's an abandoned vehicle and it's not been registered and it's on the street, we towed, usually after a warning, but that's it. Or it's just different ways of getting there. I think what the ordinance doing are cutting through some of the, wait time that it would have to be there for a higher revised code to catch up.
I
And
just
zoning
point on that
ordinances.
just for a second.
Zoning ordinance are not enforced by the
Right.
Hamilton County Sheriff.
That's statewide for all county police departments.
So our zoning ordinances are part of it.
So do all the villages then hire a local police
Well,
person to do that?
actually, that's up to each individual village. I know North Bend does not, and I know the Village of Addison is no longer doing that. We decided to do that as in response to citizen complaints about gunshots going off into the village. Number one, we also, and I'll take the blame if need be, to me, there's no sense in being a village if you can't enforce what your residents have asked for. And if you take, for example, you have that copy of that sticker.
Oh, I don't have one with me.
Well, let me give you an example. Solicitors coming to your building, okay? We actually have a solicitor's ordinance. And that has just been updated and is part of our village code. We've heard those complaints because we had no way to address that. We have people parking on the streets with semis that are too heavy for our streets. We have an ordinance that addresses that. There are ordinances that deal with criminal and civil issues. We're going to have to look at our nuisance ordinance, for example, noise ordinance at night. We get complaints, and the sheriff's department will get calls. But just as it was said, I'm not sure who said it over here, but if you go up to Butler County or any of the sheriff's departments, they're not set up to enforce local ordinances. And they're not designed to file into our court because every time if they would do that, they would have to appear in court. There's overtime and different things that goes with that. We have chosen to bring back a very small footprint so that we have a detective. Okay, we've already hired that person that can go out and investigate. So if the sheriff's department has an issue, they get a report, let's say, for gunfire in a neighborhood. There's a lot of that up in Westgate, a lot of it over in Aston View. They have the ability to go out and investigate the complaint beyond the sheriff's department in conjunction with the sheriff's department. And then that could appear in our mayor's court. That answers your question.
Yes. And then the other question I had is, what's the worst case scenario if we do go insolvent? Then do we go under Miami Township? Is that what you were saying?
What would happen, and there's a variety of things, okay? First of all, the village can be forced to disband if we can't provide police and fire. Okay, there's a new law that came out. State auditor is involved in that, so we would then become virtually an unincorporated area. If you go into Miami Township, for example, their zoning regulations are sort of piecemeal. There's some areas in Miami Township that have no zoning. Okay, there's others that do. But the only court, I believe, that you guys can go to is down at the housing court down in Hamilton County. The cost of that is basically prohibitive. And the reason why it's prohibitive is the fact that if you go down there, I have actually sat in that court before I ran for mayor. I wanted to see how it operated. You are constantly put into a situation where there's continuances. And I know the sheriff's department has to deal with that same issue, where you show up to court and then the lawyer says we need more time, and then it just keeps putting it off. That would happen in Miami Township. You would still have your fire, okay, but you would be paying more. In other words, what we're asking here is less than what Miami Township just brought. Miami Township had a 4.5 mil levy because their first levy failed. So that meant they had to go back for a new levy, just like Mrs. Bolt was talking about. That was a renewal levy. It failed. Now it was a new levy. And I did more work on this because I actually went and took a look at a house similar to mine, okay? I live in Coleman Woods and found a house over in Indian Grove that was within like $3,000 in the valuation. Mine was higher than theirs. But their tax on the fire levy they passed is higher than what I calculated out here. There's another issue. Right now you're paying for your garbage. Okay, they have a garbage levy that you would have to pay. And that also is sort of strange in some respects because to make sure every resident in the unincorporated area, they base that on the value of your home. So the more money the more your house is valued, the more you're going to pay for your garbage pickup. Whereas in the village of Cleves, everybody pays a set fee. North Bend withdrew from that. They used to do theirs that way, but it was so expensive to the individual property owner. They wound up putting their own levy on, and they have their own contract with Rumpke. So there are differences. The other thing I would tell you is once that would happen, that would have impact on the water department, and you would no longer be getting a residential discount. I know people think in the village here that you're already paying too much money for your water. I can assure you, you are not. Because I have a rental property in Warren, Indiana, and the cost with no sewage is $100 lowest. That's the lowest you're gonna pay. Because that's on the septic tank. But because we're part of the Hamilton County Sewer District, everybody in Hamilton County has to pay that sewer bill. So it isn't like Cleves is charging that to you. That's actually being charged by the Metropolitan District. Our water is much cheaper than Cincinnati. I forget what the percentage was. I think you would know that.
For in-resident comparable rate, we're about 11% cheaper this year. We'll be 14% cheaper next year in the city of Cincinnati. But what's important to remember there is if we were ever to become insolvent and the water district went away, you wouldn't pay the equivalent. You wouldn't pay the rate of an in-resident. You would pay their rate plus a 20 or 30% premium for being out of resident rate. So your water rates would be set to increase, between 20 and 30%.
Does that answer your question okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you very much for those questions. We really appreciate it. Mr. Meister?
Can
You wanna
I say
give
something?
your-
Can I say something?
Sure, go ahead. Gary.
In regards to your question, if the village was to dissolve, there are other things that we could think about as well. Like now, the village has, and we have debt, we have road improvements, and we get loans on the waterworks, has a lot of loans. If the village dissolved, those debts don't just disappear. In Miami Township, not gonna start paying on that debt. The village of Cleves residents would still be responsible for all of that debt.
There will be an assessment until the debt is all paid.
And just one more point to that, our neighbor down the road, Addiston, is experiencing a lot of trouble. And there's been some discussion on what would happen if Addiston dissolved and became part of Miami Township. The reality is Miami Township has a good deal of TIF money, which is restricted money that can be used where that district exists. But if Addiston became part of Miami Township, Township wouldn't be able to use that TIF money to fund it. Likewise, if Cleves ever became insolvent, they wouldn't be able to use that funding for Cleves. And I mention that because it would likely result in an additional general fund levy for the township to be able to fund taking on, whether it's Addiston or us. So, an apples to apples comparison today is slightly cheaper, but if Cleves were to go insolvent, the reality is Miami Township would probably place a general fund levy on, and your taxes would increase even more than they are today.
If I can add to that, Cindy, since you're the fiscal officer over there, they've not had a new general fund levy in 50 years.
6 years.
So, in 6 years? So, basically, if
1%.
they go for a general fund levy, it's gonna be based on new valuation. Think how much property value has gone up over that period of time.
Really, that then it only brings in like 120,000 a year.
But it would bring in a lot more.
Oh, if
So
we,
it was-
we renewed it at a replacement or a new levy, yeah.
I would like to add that two of us, me and Jerry, and I don't know how many of you residents were around, Nancy, Bev, we went through a dissolution attempt, 20 years ago? More than 20 years ago.
Early nineties.
And we actually had Dusty Rhodes, who was the county auditor at the time, came to our residence. We did it down at Town Hall, I think, down here. And he explained some of the things that would affect us if we dissolved. Now, laws have probably changed. I'm not trying to scare anybody because it is what it is. We're very unique. We are an incorporated village, which allows us to pass our own laws as long as it doesn't go against the Ohio Revised Code. But we're also located within the boundaries of Miami Township. So if you look at your tax bill, you pay a very small stipend to the township. I'm not sure why and what it is. My tax bill, I paid $15.91 for a half year, because we're in that unique situation. So that's true of all three villages down there. And I would just say they went over lots of things. Jerry mentioned the debt. That's the first thing that popped in my mind. Is that any loans you've taken out for road repairs or anything that the village is in debt for, it does not go away. It would be assessed on every resident who taxes the village paid. But there's a lot of complex issues involved, and I don't want to simplify it too much other than to say your zoning goes away, all your zoning laws go away. Now the township could then decide to put up for a vote to do residential, single family residential in Westgate and Coleman Woods and Aston View. But then it goes to the ballot and the residents have to approve it. And there are certain areas in the township that aren't zoned because the residents don't want it. They don't want people telling you they can't shoot their guns off in their backyard or that they can't keep cows and chickens and pigs or whatever. They don't want to be told what they can do and what they can't do. Unfortunately for us, we have 1,000 homes in a 1.5 mile circumference, 3,500 population, all stuck together. We don't have farmland out here. Everybody's pretty close to each other. And that's where the zoning comes in really handy. Keeps the value of your property at a certain level, if certain things aren't allowed. So I think that, there's so many unknowns if we were forced to dissolve. And it would be several years down the road that I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, other than to be sure to answer questions if anybody has it. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say.
Mr. Rice, before you go.
Okay.
Jerry, are you finished talking? Any other thing that council wanna address that? I forgot what I was gonna say.
I'm sorry, Ron.
Okay, so the levy is for fire, police, and, the squad, right?
Yeah, the
So that's
EMT,
part of.
fire, police, and
Okay.
EMT.
Do you all know how many runs per year the squad makes or per month or
Off the
something?
top of my head, I don't, but I think it's around 300 to 400.
Probably like 400.
Around 400.
Justin, do you have those figures from the recent contract
It says
negotiation?
One second.
A year?
He's got the figures.
I think there was only 2 fire runs.
Fire runs are drastically lower.
Yeah, I think there was
But
one.
when you say fire runs, a car accident, the fire truck's dispatched. It's not necessarily like a house fire.
Well, my point is, how much is each run costing us? We know what they want per year, to cover, but how much is that costing the village per run to do that? And then my second thought is there any way that you can get any of that out of the residents from their homeowners insurance or anybody like that?
The fire department does do what they call soft billing, so on squad runs, they will bill the person's health insurance. If health insurance doesn't pay, they'll bill the resident. I think they send 3 bills. If they don't pay it, then they just write it off. That's what I call soft billing. They do get reimbursed, that money that does go to the township and that is not taken off of our property.
Does that go up as citizens' property taxes go up? I mean,
That does not. What they bill the insurance,
I mean,
no, the insurance
here's
companies
what, and
control
I'm
that.
not bragging, but I've lived in Queens 79 years. I've lived in the same home 57 years. I've used the squad 2 times in those years, and I've never called the police. Now, my taxes are a hell of a lot cheaper in Coleman Woods. And, so why are they, taxed so much for a run? It just seems like we need to, for the person who's paying or needs that, or pay for that.
To answer your question, our average calls for service from 2020 to 2023 were 435 calls annually, and that's a mix of EMS and fire. And we use that as a negotiating point when we negotiated our new contract.
Okay, I mean, because, it's simple division, divide that into what you're paying, and that's so much a run,
Unfortunately, our fire and EMS provider didn't see the same value in charging per run. And I can see where they come from with that. Often when we're talking emergency services, we equate it to a parachute. And the reality is or homeowners insurance policy. You have to carry homeowners insurance policy the entire time you have your loan. The reality is you may have 0 homeowners claims, but you still pay the same premium every year. And to the parachute analogy that they used is, you don't need it until you need it real bad. And you want to make sure that you have one on board when you do. So we approach that, Mr. Meister, with the calls, the cost per run and the average per year, and the rate that we had is the best we're going to get. We started negotiations at $412,000 for this year, and we were able to negotiate it down to $360,000.
I know you've been in negotiations, but I'm just thinking, is there another avenue, to do that? And for instance, now with your police, I know I was involved in council back in the 70s, and I mean, a car could tear down 100 feet of guardrail, and it kind of was left unattended. Eventually, Cleves fixed it, and is the accident reports that happen in the Cleves, where there's Cleves damage, whether it's sod or whether it's curb or whatever, do you get a copy of that? Do you bill their insurance company for that money, or does that mean we might have to raise money for you? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's one of my responsibilities, and we have to determine what we self-insure and what we're going to report to our general liability carrier. So, for example, a few months ago, we had a flower pot that was destroyed. The cost on that was, let's say, $2,000. It's not worth filing a claim with our general liability insurer, because that claim is going to increase our premium by more than $2,000. But like anyone carries insurance, if there's a critical loss, if they crash into our municipal building, we are covered. Now, we do work hand in hand with the sheriff's office, and they provide us copies of the OH1, the crash reports, when they come in, and we do try to reach out to the at-fault party's insurance company to get reimbursed.
Pretty well answered. I do have one thought, and I don't mean to knock anybody, but it seems like so many times, Westgate, for instance, a squad will make a run up there, and the great big fire truck follows it. Can anybody answer why that is?
I can tell you that I worked at Lake Gloria many years ago in Corning Township. A little boy got a 3-prong fishing hook caught in his arm.
Mm-hmm.
I called because the mother wouldn't drive 30 minutes to come take her son. And we had 4 vehicles pull in the parking lot of Lake Gloria. My parents lived across the street. They sent my brother running over because they thought something had happened to me. They sent a police car, an ambulance, a fire truck, and I think that's
That
normal,
is
isn't it?
yeah, that is a question that Miami Township Fire Department would have to answer, but in my history with the fire department, depending on the call, if it's a potential,
Would they need some kind of apparatus or
non-commuter, they
something?
need extra help lifting, they will automatically send extra personnel. Nowadays, you always have a paramedic that's in a regular vehicle, and you have your EMTs in the squad. There's a lot of factors that come into
They don't
play.
always send a fire truck though, right? Not always.
You notice a lot of
Sometimes
times.
sometimes
they
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 go by my house.
Yes,
some
I know, I figured.
some departments they have a policy where they send the truck first to determine if the squad is really needed. And then they'll dispatch the squad. Every department has their own guidelines on how they want to dispatch their equipment.
Well, because you guys are gonna try to sell the village 4% increase. And when you,
4 mil.
4 mil, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So when you look around, you think, well, when I go to Kroger's and there's a great big fire truck over there with 3 guys getting groceries to take back to the township, and I got a friend who lives in
Miami Township.
no, 10 miles out of Kroger's. For $65 a year, Kroger's will deliver her a box of cake mix if that's all she wants.
But she has to be there to get that delivery. And if guys on the fire department may get a run and may not be there to accept that
Do they
delivery.
have a secretary?
Not always, not 24/7.
Well, I rest my case.
When they're on duty for 24-hour shifts, they do have to eat.
Trust me, I would not be living in Cleves for that many years if I didn't love Mayberry.
We love your politics,
And if a call comes in, I guarantee you those guys will drop every grocery item they have and be out the door and head to the scene.
Well, that's true, but the expense of that truck is not cheap.
Sometimes they do take the truck out on things like that because fire trucks they don't get anywhere near as many runs as a squad. Sometimes they take the truck out just to drive it.
So every
Certain
four.
vehicles, and you gotta run them.
If you don't run them, they think you're bad. And sometimes they used to send a police officer, and then they say, "Oh yeah, we do need these." Come on,
We were in the fire department and things, we were fortunate enough that the police officers, police always responded with us, and they always helped us with lifting, carrying our bags back out and things. And other departments don't have that luxury, so they do have to send extra personnel.
And I think the county does that a lot here in the village now,
Yeah, I think the guys do when they're available.
which is
Yeah.
probably not part of their job, really.
Are there any other residents that have questions or want to comment? Would you come forward, please, give your first and last name and your address?
Sure, thank you. Scott Knoll, 506 Laurelwood Drive. I apologize, I was a few minutes late. I was finishing up some work, so I was walked in a little bit late. Two main questions that I have, and if we could rewind to the part-time police officer. So my understanding of it is it's for, like we talked about, it's for local code type things that are not under the purview of Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. One question I had, I know that we kept talking about the shots fired in Westgate and stuff like that. Does that or does that not fall under discharging a firearm in a residential neighborhood? Wouldn't that be and I'm not trying to disparage anything, I'm just curious.
So the code he's looking for is, you can have a range set up, as long as it's being shot safely,
Okay,
not causing danger, you're responsible for your round. It is legal to have
Okay.
shoot one in your backyard if you set one up.
okay,
They have an ordinance against that's a different story.
right. Okay, and that was,
Revised code is the
okay, and that was just kind of my question on it. And that's not the only thing, understandably, that they're gonna be doing, but it just kind of jumped out at me. It's like,
you can shoot in North Bend,
yeah,
and sometimes, like at my house, I hear them boom, 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 and I know they're shooting at North Bend. But one night I was out at 2 a.m. and I heard a few rounds kind of close, and I know it wasn't in North Bend. And I'm like, gee, I hope I don't want to get shot out there.
Did you hightail it into the house real quick?
No.
Like,
And
if
people
you're-
can't
you can always
determine
call police to have
the fireworks over a gunshot sometimes, you're
One
right.
of our safety meetings, we had a resident come down to talk about the deer that was shot in the front yard.
Oh.
You're dealing with people in close proximity, you know, I don't know what your background is, I'm not a police officer or anything like that, but I do have a concealed carry. You're taught that you gotta be taking a look at where you're firing and how you do, some people aren't looking at that. And when you're dealing with 1.5 square miles, tightly packed people, that's where the concern, and the question that night was, well, what happens? Are you guys gonna wait until you have a child shot in your yard? Or are you gonna do something about it? We chose to do something about it.
Sure. And I think it's not to get into the merits of where that whole thing falls, but that was kind of my curiosity on it is going back to the fact that we do live in such a densely populated area. That was what my kind of concern on that particular issue was, is I know that we have a local ordinance for it, but does it not fall under an unsafe discharge of a firearm in a neighborhood?
It depends on circumstance, I think
Sure.
if the sheriff's department felt that there was a threat,
Yeah, understandable. The other question I had is on the part-time police officer, is that a sworn Ohio law enforcement officer? So they do have arrest powers and everything like that. Who does that person answer? Say they have to place somebody under arrest. Who do they answer? Who do they answer to?
I'm gonna let Justin, who's also our town marshal,
Okay.
address that.
Good evening. So ultimately, they're sworn officers through the Ohio Police Officer Training Commission. So that ultimately falls under the authority of the Ohio Attorney General.
Okay.
Locally, I serve as the town marshal, which is the verbiage used in the Ohio Revised Code. It's interchangeable with police chief. So I would be the chief executive law enforcement officer over the local authority. But ultimately, they're all sworn and comply with all state regulations. Is an Ohio peace officer, and they're required to do their continuing education every year for the Ohio Law Enforcement Gateway.
Okay.
But you'll also be calling the sheriffs in. I mean, when you're putting someone under arrest, is our detective gonna do that, or is he likely to call for assistance with the sheriff?
I think case by case would dictate that, but I think your question was, letter of law, what's the scope?
Yeah.
Of the authority?
So part of that, and then also just a concern of liability of it. If you have one individual out there who's a part-time employee with no other quote unquote support system, hierarchy structure, whatever, however you want to look at it, does that start to open up the potential for liability if something kind of goes a little bit sideways? And I'm sure that you guys have all thought about that, but that's just kind of where my mind goes of I know how quickly situations can get out of hand where you can go out on an open burning complaint in somebody's backyard and it divulges immediately of what does that kind of look like. And I know that the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office is always there for backup and assistance and things like that, but that would just be one of my concerns as a citizen is just the safety of that person going out and then the liability for the village as well.
If I could address that, because we touched on that today with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office about the communication, the backup, and the safety, that was a primary focus of our entire conversation. So we believe we have the communication in place to ensure that they know where we are, we know where they are, so that in the event there's those type of issues. We also have the ability, they have an intelligence unit, the Sheriff's Department, they share that information with us. So we do have somewhat of a sense of what's going on with that property and how much danger there is involved in it. So you're right, we have thought about that. So has the Sheriff's Department. We got for about an hour a day on that.
Yeah, and so from a liability standpoint, our local authority will be covered under our general liability. So the village is covered from any liability. As far as the communication officer safety piece of this, the officers are going to be equipped with radios that communicate with any law enforcement agency around here, fire departments, that all routes through the communication center of Hamilton. So anytime, our officers would do anything, whether it be self-initiated activity, or something we go out in collaboration with the sheriff's office on, that's all gonna be communicated before. There'll be redundancy next week. So it's not like they're gonna be a lone ranger.
Okay, and I guess that brings up another question. Are there boundaries in which what their focus is going to be on? Or is this, because my concern again is that this could very quickly, you get, not to say that I'm sure the person's wonderful and they're vetted and everything, that's great. I just have a concern sometimes of if they start to get a little bit beyond what the scope of what their intended purpose is within the village.
Sure. So I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to be engaged in criminal justice enforcement, apprehending, and arresting, and working in the adjudication process. So at no point is their authority limited in any way from any other criminal justice agency or law enforcement officer in Ohio. Our vision is to address quality of life issues.
Okay.
And so, like we've discussed some, but you know, nuisance properties is a big one. And when you talk nuisance properties, a blighted property, that's really the tip of the iceberg, right? The underlying issues are generally theft and burglary and robbery and you know, wanted individuals, which is why they're going to be engaged in criminal justice activity. Their scope will remain narrowly focused on quality of life issues.
Okay. And I think that that's maybe where a lot of residents, myself included, when we read that document that was put out, was I'm 100% agree the jurisdiction that I formerly worked at before I retired, we had a very, very strict code enforcement policy and it worked out great for the city I worked for. That was what my mind automatically went to was, are we confusing people with what the intended purpose of this role is, or should it be more of just a strictly code enforcement? Because in my mind, that is probably better suited to be the title for the person. I understand with the, you know, with all the things that you guys have just discussed, the importance of that 100%, I get that. But I think for my mind as a citizen and a resident of the community, that the focus should probably be a little bit more the code enforcement side of it, to continue to improve those quality of life things and leave some more of the things that you were discussing about apprehension and things like that. Maybe, yeah.
If I may for a second, we have a council member here that we have a doctor, we have a point, we got pictures with the wife. So
Okay.
I want to excuse him for a second.
Understood. Thanks, Charles.
But to answer your question, I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to explain why. You have 15, it's a 15-hour position. They're not going to be patrolling. They're not going to be the patrol. All calls are going to be going to the sheriff's department. And there isn't going to be, you know, that doesn't mean if they're out on, let's say they're serving somebody with a property violation. That doesn't mean that won't go into some other issue. But that issue is why they have the radios and they will be calling for backup. Every village, I believe has, and Lieutenant, you can correct me if I'm incorrect on this, but they generally have contracts for mutual aid. So if there is a problem, you guys are always there to back them up. Am I correct on that?
Of course, we always back up and assist other agencies or neighbors to they're in some type of situation, whether it's an arrest or a fight or whatnot, that they need assistance.
And what I heard earlier today in the meeting we had at the sheriff's department, the plans they have out in the West District, if those come into fruition, there's even going to be better coverage. So I think this is sort of an unusual partnership, okay? But we think it's a good one for our village. I would agree with you, most of it was probably going to be on the code side of things. And that's really where we envision it. But it doesn't mean they're not going to come upon criminal activity. And that's where there has to be the communication, the safety factors we were discussing today. So we are working on those issues.
Yeah, understood.
And that position is technically considered a detective, right? That's the way it was
For
explained.
Investigator was the term.
Investigator, okay. They're not a patrol officer
No,
then.
we're not in patrol.
I think that's something that's confusing to the residents. They're not patrol officers, they're investigators.
But they're carrying firearms, right?
Correct. I
So we
believe so.
see them,
Yeah.
they're gonna
See, it
flip
says
flop.
There isn't any question. We cannot function. And I can tell you with 100% certainty, we cannot function as a police department if they don't know. You cannot send any officer out without him having his firearm, because they never know when something's gonna go south. Secondly, when you're dealing with the Attorney General's office and that, and RCIC and leads, they actually mandate, okay, that we have to be a criminal justice enforcing agency. So they have all full police powers.
So you can see where this is gonna confuse people, cause you took
Yeah.
our police away, and now
Well,
you're
we
giving us
did
our
not
police back, and people are
We
confused
did not
by
take-
that.
This council did not take the police.
Well, they didn't even let us talk about it, it was done when we got to the meeting.
Believe me, I understand that. Mr. Meister and I were at the same meeting when that went on. And actually, I was out distributing petitions to save our police department. Unfortunately, they were, I'm talking about the council at the time, did not agree. Jerry Meister was on that council. She voted against it that night. And, but I can tell you, just so you know, okay, we have 2 remaining council people. They are fantastic council people from the old council. They were kept in the dark of what was going on more than even the residents were. And the residents didn't have any idea what was going on. So, unfortunately, that happened. We cannot change that. And it was one of the things we talked about today with the sheriff's department. We don't have the ability to go back to the old police department, but we do have the ability to control what's within our venue. And our ordinances are important to the quality of life of our village and the protection of our village. Now, I could go into some things that the sheriff's department is working on right now with us that are criminal issues, major problems, but that isn't the focus of this tonight. There will be cooperation. The sheriff's department's going to do their job. You know, they are going to come anytime a resident calls. There's no doubt about that. I wish I could change the past, but I can't. But we can certainly focus on the future.
Yeah, and that pretty much that answers that side of it. Like I said, I think the verbiage of the title of the position may be a little bit confusing to a lot of residents, especially when we look at it. I'm sure that there's going to be other questions as this continues to go on that will maybe have already been addressed, maybe have to be addressed as far as jurisdiction, investigation, that kind of thing, which I'm confident will be done. I'll just leave it with this. Personally, I personally feel like the focus of it really just needs to be more on code enforcement, property maintenance, improving and maintaining the quality of life of our residents around here. And I think that would be if it were my opinion, should be the narrow focus of this, and maybe not as much on what we're looking at on the law enforcement side, just as opinion of the resident. Yeah. Question number 2 that I have is, who is responsible for the maintenance and repair of fire hydrants throughout the village? Waterworks. Okay. With the proposed levies and everything like that that's going on, is that going to be a focus of anything? Because I know that we're talking public safety with fire, police, and everything else like that.
Waterworks functions totally separate from the
Understand that,
water
yeah.
funds, water revenue, is totally separate from the village and the
Correct.
general fund.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the fire hydrants, that is done through the waterworks with waterworks revenue.
Okay.
The fire department conducts hydrant checks twice a year, unless once something happens to them and is brought to their attention, they communicate with and work with the waterworks to let them know, when their repairs are needed, and then they're done through the water.
Because I've lived out here for 20 years, and it seems like you drive around, and we have a lot of fire hydrants out of service, which is a concern to me. Do we have a fiscal or financial plan in place to start getting the repairs made to some of the fire hydrants to get them back in order, or?
I think Justin's got to answer that because
Okay.
he is, there used to be a water board that handled all this stuff. Bev Myers is sitting back there and remembers it well. We don't have that anymore. So because we have a village administrator, we have to be totally separate. He runs it, okay? We really don't have a say in it. That's according to the Ohio Revised Code. So Justin, I'm gonna let you answer that because you're the only one who can answer.
So I started in September, and to your point, the fire hydrants have not been maintained like they should be. So, point taken, I understand. I've met with Miami Township Fire Department and Whitewater Township on how we better address these issues. So, look at this globally, there's a lot of issues, right? Firefighters turn it on, and they don't necessarily appreciate how delicate the equipment is at times. So, they can water hammer, break a stem, sometimes it rusts, and it's not really out of service, but they can't open it easily. So we've actually been working on this the last 2 weeks, addressing fire hydrants. We have a list that we maintain with fire departments. We checked 12 of them today. Well, we checked more than 12 today, but out of the ones that were checked today on the list, 12 of those that had been marked out of service by the fire department, in fact, are operational.
Okay.
So one of the things we've done is we've created a standardized form that the fire department can submit to us. We respond to it and send it back to them, and that says, hey, it is out of service and it needs to be repaired or replaced, or we checked it, repaired in its function. So we actually took the red sticker off 12 of them today. They are operational. There are a handful of them that need to be replaced, and a lot of that is just cost benefit analysis. Every fire hydrant should work, but the reality of it is the fire hydrant itself costs around $7,000. That's the first problem. The second problem is after you pay $7,000 for one, it can take upwards to a year to get it in stock. Because you just don't have it. There's just a supply chain issue. So we have 6 of them right now, and we have those scheduled to be allocated to the highest density populations where they're going to get the most benefit for replacing. We put a water rate increase this year of 8%. That'll increase our revenue when water works, and we're going to use a portion of that money to address all of the fire hydrant issues. So it's my goal in the next year to make sure that every fire hydrant is viewed and touched by a water technician of ours, in addition to the fire department's regular checks, and anyone that needs to be replaced will go on schedule and we'll get those fixed.
I want to add one thing to that question. The fire department does prioritize them for us as well. So when they're looking at a hydrant that's out of service, they'll take into account like where the next closest one. If they have 2 in one area that are out, one over here, we're going to address one of those first. So they do prioritize them for us.
Okay. Good. Like I said, those were kind of my biggest questions is obviously in the fire hydrants has always been kind of a concern because, like I said, I've lived here for a long time, and it seems like you drive past the same ones over and over and over again. So feels good if we have a plan in place. That's all we can ask for, and then things don't happen overnight. And I think as long as we have a plan, it's good. Appreciate the transparency tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with this question. So thank you.
We appreciate you being here and asking questions. Anyone else out in the audience want to ask questions?
So if the tax levy goes through, it's not gonna raise our taxes a lot.
Or it'll raise your taxes?
How much?
Well, you're gonna have to figure out, in fact, I had a question from another resident, and I'm sort of prepared to answer that question for you. But, if you do, her property, for example, her market value, I think, was about $2,000. That's what it's based on. So, I'm sorry? 200, correct, 200,000. And, sorry.
What street is that?
200, I'm sorry. So,
A shed?
what you're going to be paying is you're going to be paying 100, per thousand. And so you would be $250
For the whole year.
for the whole year.
How much was it?
That's the easiest way to look at it.
Forming a levy, it would cost $140 a year for a house that had a $100,000 market value. So when you look on your tax bill and you look at the market value of the house,
Down on this thing, it's called On Top, so I don't always get a Denver care of that. On Top.
you have access to the internet.
Yeah, my daughter can pull it up for you.
Yeah, on the Humboldt County Auditor website, if you pull up your property.
I've got mine right here.
You can see all of that information.
Is that your assessed value, Chuck?
No, you gotta pay based on your market value.
Okay.
Market value.
So what you would do, and for example, I pulled up another one here from another resident, lives over here on Porter Street. Their market value is $104,640. I'll just print it off tonight, because she also asked that question.
So it's about 140,
Yeah,
a little over
a
100.
little bit, yeah, it'll be a little bit more than that. So you gotta really figure out what, I mean, this is what a market, I mean, you have to go in, there's different things you can pull off. So I actually went through and did
Put on your
a lot of
smartphone.
that.
Yeah,
But it is pretty simple, and honestly, you don't have internet, and you need to figure that out. I would simply say come down with Penny, and, who's our
who's
clerk.
Penny?
Penny works here out in your office, she's
It's our
our
village
village clerk.
clerk.
Okay, so she's here, whatever,
She's here.
Yeah, Mike,
she's here 4 days a week, 10 till,
She's here from 10 to 2:30 Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and she's here from 3 to 7 on Tuesdays.
see, I have different clients. Not looking at
as
one.
long as you've got the address.
Yeah,
We can get that up for you. She'll be glad to prove it for you. I'll talk to her tomorrow and show her how that's done. It's a fairly simple process.
yeah, I think I've been down there before.
And we can help you figure out what that
Yeah.
is. Any other residents want to come forward, ask any questions? Come forward, man, your first and last name, please.
So anyway, I do that afterwards, so that way my name, address, and everything.
Oh,
You don't have to
okay.
announce
Got
it, you just make sure that you
Yeah,
record it.
as long as it's out there with
I'm
you.
Amy. I am the police husband. We currently have two levies. When do they expire?
Two levies that we currently have. We actually have 3 levies on the books right now.
Okay.
One's a very old levy, and that's related to police and fire pensions, very small amount. Then we have a police levy, and we have a general fund.
We have a fire levy.
Fire levy.
In this letter, it said, please levy.
Yes, police, fire, and then we have.
And they're continuous and they're small amounts.
Right.
2.5, I think is one of them.
Our,
Yeah, that's
our
right.
general fund levy is 3.9 mils.
And it was renewed a couple years ago.
Our fire levy is 2.5 mils. And our police levy, I believe, is 1.5 mils.
I think so, I think that sounds right.
Now it's
And those mills were generated, the value years ago.
Right.
They don't ever go up because they're continuous
Right.
and they're not based on any reevaluation.
Are you guys planning on trying to just remove them when they come? back
They don't
up?
come up, they're continuous.
It's something's cadence, okay.
So the good thing with the continuous levy is you don't ever have to run.
Okay.
Bad thing with the continuous levy is it's stuck in time what the millage rate was at that time in the past. So for example, our general fund loan, our millage rate was around $59,000 when we passed that 3.9 million. That would be stuck at 59,000 per mill over life. I can't tell you what, without looking, what our police and fire are. They're probably comparable to 50,000. Our millage rate now is around $83,200. And so if we run a new levy, it'll be based on that. So what's happened is over time, while that levy was adequate when it was passed, as inflation's went up, that stayed consistent, and now it
I
doesn't.
totally get that.
doesn't pay.
With the valuations of our homes all going up, you guys did get an increase in these levies.
No,
No increase in the levy. We did
not the ones
receive-
that have already been passed.
Even though it's still based off of.
It's based off the values at the time.
Right,
it's
no, and I get
passed.
that, but it's still.
It doesn't ever go up.
Yeah, this certified amount that they've given us, they will adjust that certified amount if you have a bunch of new
No,
homes built.
it's they.
So that's the amount and they can adjust it.
Right,
So
that
that's
makes
why it
sense.
doesn't go up.
So if there was more mileage or more millage and more homes built,
Yeah,
they
it-
go up.
And because our valuation is higher now, is why we are asking for a lower amount.
Right.
Because we're getting more money per mill.
What was the amount that you said that we paid to the?
You mean the police contract? Yes.
$22.33. And you guys are expecting it to go up, it's double by 3.3%.
It's 5%.
What was the question?
Please contact, because I wrote down 600, you guys
Why won't you?
doing 900 or something like that, that's why I was like, oh, that's a lot.
total in 2025
I'm sorry, I wasn't speaking.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
the total
For police and fire and our local PD for 2025, yeah, the total cost was $635,520, that's probably where you guys.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's a lot.
That's all of them, all of that. And then,
And what those continuous levies don't bring in, we are paying out the general.
Right.
That's why we're asking for a safety services levy only.
that's all, that number confused me, so I was like, we're on 630, how are you guys understanding period?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you for asking.
Sure that's all?
Yeah, if I have anything else, I'll just request it.
Anyone else want to ask any questions in the comments? Absolutely. You've signed in out there too. So
Yes, I did.
you-
The, part-time police officers who've been here, are you getting more than one person doing this job?
Our intent is to have 2 part-time officers.
And what would the procedure be to get in touch with one of those officers if we have an ordinance situation going on?
So we're still in the process of implementing this. We're going to update our phone system here. So, the village number is 941-1212. You wouldn't be able to reach a Cleves officer for any emergency. It would be, call and they'll respond to you the next time they work. But there will be, a fast key and an option where you can hit a button and go to their voicemail and they'll respond to you, on the next day.
Okay, so you have a procedure.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from residents? Any comments?
Yeah, when's this, all gonna begin?
Well, I can tell you this much, okay, if you go back to the agenda just for a second, sort of the next step was council discussion and comments. At the next steps, if you don't mind, I'll share that information with you. Because the next step has to be that we have to take an action at the next council meeting. So the next council meeting, what'll happen is we will present a resolution of necessity, that's what it's called. And once the council decides the village, okay, which they're gonna be talking a little bit about themselves here in a second, we're not voting on anything tonight, but they're gonna have an opportunity to share their thoughts. They will be voting on July 9th. From that point on, once that resolution has been passed, I will hand deliver it to the auditor's office. And the reason I'm gonna hand deliver it is because we're not gonna mail it. We've been having problems with our email getting through, so I'm gonna hand deliver it to make sure they get it. There's a 7-10 day turnaround. Once that 7-10 day turnaround is, they have to certify what the actual amount's going to be. And once that's certified, okay, then the council has to vote to put it on the ballot. And once they vote to put it on the ballot, which will also happen in July, because we've got to have everything down there by August 6th, that will be when we know for sure what's going to happen. So those really are our next steps. We have to decide the village, and one of the things we wanted to do, unlike, if I could just draw your attention back to you should have a copy of this letter from 2023. If you don't have it, there is a paragraph in the one that has the village for this time. I asked them to put that in. So I'll read first what that paragraph says. In the 2023 proposed levy, if it would have passed, it would have been based on current real property for tax year 2023. That was one of the things that we needed to clarify, because the old council, because they didn't have the valuation, okay, evaluations had not been completed. It wasn't anything that they decided nefariously. They didn't have the value. So the value they were given was based on old valuation, which was not accurate. So if you take a look at what that levy would have brought in, that levy would have brought in, because it would have been based on new valuation, would have brought in $576,153. So when they certified this back in this letter, you can see that they projected it would bring in $423,000 a year. It would have been much higher than that. Even this level, if we go with a 4 mil, is going to bring in much less than that 7 mil. So it is based on new valuation, and we've got to get them to certify what the actual amount's going to be. Once that's done, then we can communicate it out to our residents, which we will, okay? And when I say communicate, we're going to make sure they're aware of everything, okay? That we can make sure they're aware. It's one of the reasons why we mailed out the last letter. Excuse me, I would encourage citizens to sign up on our website, to get on our mailing list, our email mailing list. If you have email, we're going to be communicating as much as we can through that. I have a mayor's page on Facebook. We'll communicate through that. We're televising. All this is stuff that did not happen in 2023. We're going to make sure you have it. We're not going to be spending money right now on a glossy newsletter. Those cost a lot of money. Okay? They're nice. I wish we could afford to do it, but it's one of the areas that right now we can't afford. We have to figure out ways of getting the information out as best we can. Our website's a good avenue for that. I update that regularly. So there's things going up there. I'll be putting things up there tomorrow that I can't really talk about because it's not related to this. Okay? Our limit to a special meeting is only to talk with our residents, to talk about this particular issue, and then we're going to culminate in one last thing that's a carryover from our last council, and that's an abatement issue. But we're going to make sure our residents know exactly what it's going to cost. And we'll spend whatever time we need to help people understand how to navigate the auditor site. There's actually a place on the auditor site you can go and take the value of your property and go into Miami Township at a different address. You can put in your money and it'll generate for you what you'd be paying if you were in Miami Township. There's all kinds of ways to get information if you know how to navigate it. And we'll spend whatever time, if residents want to come down, Ms. Hogan and I are going to be doing some podcasts that we're going to be distributing that people can listen to. They'll be like 5 to 7 minutes. But we've got to do this all before we put it on the ballot. Once we put it on the ballot, okay, our mouths are going to be sort of shut. I mean, we can answer questions, but we're going to need a committee. Okay, we're going to need a committee to organize a PAC, just like Miami Township did with their fire fund. We're going to need a person who would serve as the treasurer, the lead person, I guess you could call it the president or chairperson, and they can accept money, private donations. The village cannot put any money into a levy. We cannot spend taxpayers' dollars to promote a levy. We can't even hold a meeting that presents new information. We can give you the facts of our budget, but we cannot promote, nor can we ask you to vote for a levy. That has to be done by a committee. And so they'll have to, whoever that committee is, and I have talked to some people and they're considering, whoever that committee is going to have to carry the load. That has not been done in recent history. It may have been done years ago, but in recent history, that has not been done. What's been happening is you got a newsletter that came out right before the election. We're reversing that whole process. Okay, we're putting everything up front, so we can talk about everything we need to talk about now. So that sort of takes care of that next steps. And I think it's really time for the council to give some of their ideas in response to what they heard this evening. And then we'll move on to the abatement issue. So I'm opening it up to council. Anybody wants to speak?
Well, I'll start off.
Go ahead.
I had originally gone into this really wanting some kind of a street improvement issue, because I think it's been a long time since we have dealt with our streets. But when we thought about the process of going to the residents and saying, you know, will you support a 3.5 safety and a 1.5 street? There was discussion as how prudent that is to go to the residents with two potential levies, especially if we can get the safety levy passed, which pays for the police and fire. It frees up money that we currently have in the general fund to do some of these other things. So after discussion and thinking about what made sense to me, I decided that probably a street levy at this time didn't make sense. What makes sense is to get our police and fire coverage paid for. And that's what this levy does. And being that it's a safety levy, it's restricted as to what it can be spent on. And it's for police and fire. So there's no question as to whether that money is going to be used for anything else. It's going to be used for our police and fire contracts. Potentially another safety issue if it presents itself. I don't know all the legalities, other than to say after a couple of years we're going to need some extra money in there to cover it, because like Justin mentioned, for a year or two that levy will more than suffice, and then as the costs go up we'll be supplementing out of the general fund again a little bit. So I decided that it made more sense to get this safety levy passed, concentrate on one thing,
Right, makes sense.
and then worry about the rest later. So, you know, how many millages you ask for is really kind of the discussion here. What do you want to go to your residents with? What can you justify? What can you know, because I'm a taxpayer too, like everybody is. So, the only difference is I've got a very close knowledge of our financial situation. So not every resident has the time nor the want to become that informed about our financial situation. It helps that I was your clerk treasurer for 18 years. So I already walked into this seat with some knowledge about that. So I think that the one safety levy makes sense to me. Justin recommended looking at 4 mil. That is probably where my head is going. But we did want to hear what residents might have to say. Looking at it's not that big of a difference between 3.5 and 4.5. It's really not that big of a difference. I'm kind of leaning myself toward a 4 mil safety services levy.
I totally agree, Linda. When I went into it, I was thinking streets. And then when it was explained and I thought about it, the safety made more sense. And another thing is being on council, we cannot be on a committee. So we are depending on the residents to head the committee.
If there is a committee,
If there
it
is
has to be a
committee,
resident.
yeah, it has to be a resident.
Yeah, we
Because
can.
council members, we cannot be on the committee.
Our spouses could, but I wouldn't have much luck convincing mine to do that.
Go with us.
And I don't have a spouse. So.
We can't promote the levy.
Right.
All we can do is give basic information, and at a certain deadline, we can't even really do that. That's why we're getting out there now to give as much information as we can, so that we don't go against the wall and have legal issues, because we don't want to do that.
Okay, Linda, can you post why you need that levy though? In newsletters or anything like that?
We can do it before, we
You
can,
can provide
we
factual
can give you
information.
factual
Yeah,
information.
okay, yeah.
To give you numbers.
Which
or
you
factual
did
information
just
we
recently,
cannot say.
that letter, they read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those numbers have changed a little bit because they reviewed some of that today, so we're gonna have to update that. But, that's the beauty of doing it now, putting it out there. You know, we've had time to look at it even more closely. I think maybe the original projections that I had didn't include the new contract. I'm not sure how that works, Justin, but I know it's different. But, so we'll adjust that. We'll get that information out. But once they vote, okay, in that special meeting in July, we're sort of just factual information.
The deadline of August 6th is probably the date when our hands are tied legally.
I'm not so sure it isn't tied the minute we vote.
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
We're not gonna risk it. We're
I
not
just
gonna
wanna
step over that line.
one comment to say, you know, I know a lot of us have talked about streets and our streets definitely need a lot of work. But if we don't have the levy to pay for the increase in the fire and police, then we can't even begin to think about repairing our streets.
The
So,
streets
that,
and sidewalks dirty out there.
yeah, so, you know, if we can alleviate the burden on the general fund, then that gives us more ability to deal with some of the other issues that we need to deal with. Which streets is a big one, you know, I live in Tolman Wood and Edgefield, it's a nightmare, and I know that there's a lot of other streets that need addressed as well, so.
Sidewalks, though, are not responsibility of the village. Sidewalks are the property owner's responsibility.
Okay.
But we can start evaluating them and letting homeowners know you
Know that-
got it,
Correct.
you got
Yes.
something you have to fix, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't have sidewalks, but there's some.
I just wanted to clarify that. Sidewalks isn't really, sometimes when you do a total street reconstruction, sidewalks might be included in
I
that,
get lucky.
depending on how the grant goes. Yeah, like aprons to driveways up in Westgate, aprons were covered in our grant, but nothing past the aprons, so,
What if you have French drains and all that, and
yeah, that's something that would be evaluated by our engineer when we were proposing to submit for a grant for a street project.
Any other council member comments?
I've been looking at the numbers here while everybody's been talking. So, we got numbers for 3.5 or 4.5 left. When we're talking about levies, putting on a levy for the fire and police contracts, to me, it would make more sense to make sure that we have enough money from these levies to carry us through 5 years. And in looking at the numbers, if we do a 4 mil levy, in the year 2030, we'll be supplementing from the general fund $195,000 and $207. If we do 4.5 mil levy in the year 2030, we will be, I didn't finish my math, we'll be supplementing about 85,000. Half
We
of
talked
that.
about that too, yeah.
But in 5 years, you're gonna be looking at a renewal levy for this.
True, but when we think about 5 years, so in 5 years from now, if we're supplementing 195,000 minus 4, about 90,000, about half of that, a little less than half, and we go for a renewal, 4.5 is gonna carry us, we'll be in a better position for the 4.5 renewal to carry us on.
I understand.
Versus if we go with the 4, if we're having to supplement with 195,000 out of the general fund, and if the contracts go up, are we gonna have to go back? and ask
I
for money?
understand, I just know it's failed 3 times, so I'm being a little cautious here.
We are scared to put on too much, but
How much difference is it gonna cost a homeowner between a 4 and a 4.5?
based on a $100,000 market value, $18 a year.
That's what I thought too.
So
But a lot of our houses are valued
we have
2
some,
and 3 times that, you know.
But then you'll be, what, $36 a
Yeah,
year? So, I mean,
I'm okay with 4 or the 4.5, but I personally, I would support the 4.5 mil. Because
Jerry,
I know
I
that that's gonna
agree.
carry us through for 5 years. And we'll be in a better spot there as far as if we decide to go with the renewal.
Jerry, I agree with
Chances
you.
are contracts are going to go up also.
That's what my math is doing too.
But I do know that we're gun shy because of the last couple levies failing, but those were also general fund levies, and when we put those levies on, our contracts, the fire contract wasn't anywhere near the amount that it is now. I mean, we need the levies for fire and police services. They're completely justified.
They're gonna probably go up. Both
Yeah.
of them are gonna go up.
So my decision would be to go with the 4.5.
That's what I'm.
Any feeling from the residents out there between a 4 and a 4.5?
Kevin, do you have any thoughts? He's the only one who hasn't mentioned anything yet.
I don't have much of a voice. I'm sorry. I'm the one who pushed 7 back in the day because our financial need is great if you want King Village to do anything. So anything will be appreciated. Anything will make us much more sustainable than we are now. In deciding between bankruptcy in 5 years or still hanging on by a thread in 5 years. That's the gift that voters will be giving us. But are you saying that we would pay a total of $200,000 or $200,000 a year? Is it $200,000 out of a year at 4 mills, or is it over the course of 5 years we paid that much into it?
As far as will we be supplementing?
Yeah.
Let me finish my math here real quick.
The point will be the same. But yeah, I think we can only ask so many times. If we can justify our activity to our residents, then
I
it's a
misspoke.
more sustainable choice. Which is
I misspoke earlier, there's a lot more difference between the numbers than what I said.
And when we worked up the 3.5 to 4.5, it was acknowledged that each one will be a gap. We're not proposing to ask for what we actually need. We're asking for less than we need. And that's still holding all our other activities as a council at the same revenue. And just hoping that inflation doesn't kill us with maintenance cost increases, salary costs, services increases.
Well, they baked some increases into every projection.
That we have to build a road or something.
Can I answer your question, now, Kevin, about the numbers?
Yeah.
So my brain calculator doesn't work as well as mine.
It has to
Right, calculator. So in the year 2030, the amount that we will be, if we do a 4 mil, the amount that we will have to supplement from the general fund is $295,793. If we do the 4.5 mil levy in 2030, we will have to supplement $87,443. It's a $200,000 difference. If we ask for a $500,000 more
That
now.
means in 2029, we wouldn't have to do anything for them, very little.
And it's gonna
Right now,
cost
it's
you
100,000.
Right. If we do a 4.5 in 2029, we would have to supplement like 66,000.
and it's gonna cost the homeowner maybe $36 more a year.
It all is depending
Well,
on the value,
right.
the market value
Right.
of the home.
The difference between 4 and 5.
I mean, I live in the older part of
$500,000
Cleveland. I have a lot lower value home. It's not gonna cost, it's gonna cost me
$18
$18.
on $100,000 a year more on $100,000 home.
That's
if
the
we
difference
rent
between a 4.0 and a 4.5.
But the 4.0 itself is gonna
Yeah.
increase people's taxes by $280.
Depends on
And
the value
times
of your
3
home.
if they have a valued house of 300,000.
When you say 280,
It's, the 4 mil is, for every $100,000 market value, is 140.
Right.
But there's a lot of houses we have up in Coleman and
Correct.
Westgate that are valued at 200,000, 300,000. So we have to remember that it's not just the difference between a 4 and a 4.5. It's a difference between,
when you're talking about residents, though, I mean, you live within your means. Somebody that lives in a $300,000 home and has the income to afford a $300,000 home.
I realize that, but I'm
Somebody
just saying
that
it's
lives
not
in a
just
$100,000
$36.
Probably has given,
I know, but I'm just saying it's not just a $36 increase, that's all.
If I can give you exactly on my house, my taxes on 4.5 would go at $537.40 a year.
And what is your market value?
The market value value is $340,000.
Yeah.
So,
$50 a month, 50 a month,
So-
not even.
in my situation, you know, and we gotta keep in mind, we've got a village that's very diverse.
Yeah.
You know, that isn't gonna kill me. Some of our residents in the downtown area, even a small increase may cause some concern. And so I wanna keep that focus. Everybody, this is all individual. Everybody's gotta make a decision that fits their economic situation. And I think the real question boils down, do we want a village or don't we want a village? It's the same thing, do we want village government doing what village government should do? And I think we're trying our best to do that, but you can't do it without money. To me, you know, when I decided to run, my wife will probably shoot me for saying this, but she didn't want me. So we're not running, and I need to go to Georgia. Because in Georgia, I will count my retirement. I want to go to Georgia. I said, then we're in Cleveland. We don't live in Cleveland. We love living in Cleveland. Then we got to invest in this place. And you cannot fault the Miami Township Fire Department for increasing the cost of their services. They got to pay them. They're in a very competitive market. They lose a lot of their officers. Same thing with the sheriff's department. Very competitive market. Nobody's just beating down the bush to become a deputy. Okay, maybe there were years where that was the case, but in our current political climate, not so much. You know, so they need to be paid to keep their deputies, so they don't lose them to other departments, whether it be Butler County or Warren County, that has maybe a lot more money, more influence. We got to be willing to pay. And I think both the Miami Township Fire Department and the Sheriff's Department and our very small footprint is worth everything. Me personally, but everybody's going to have to say to themselves, is it worth it to me? So, no judgment here at all. We got to work at selling our residents. Hopefully they're going to trust that we're trying to give them the best information we can. So, any other comments from residents? 4.5 versus 4.0, Mr. Oppenheimer?
Not necessarily with that. If you look at your tax bill, you see the appraised value of your home. If you look elsewhere, you see the taxable value of your home. The levies are village based on the appraised value, I take it, right?
Market value.
It's the market value.
You pay based on the market value.
You look at the letter that's sent out from them, they base it on your market value. You're only charged 1/3 of that, but it is the millage that you're calculating is based on your market value of your home on the auditor side. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Nancy Nichols. For the sake of assurance that this levy, if you choose to run it, and I think that you absolutely have to, police and fire are quite valuable services, and I've needed EMTs once or twice in my time, and our township does a great job with their care. I think that you're probably going to have more success passing a 4 based on the demographic diversity that you've already mentioned. So while 4.5 gives us a lot less out of general fund down the road, I think for the purposes of a successful pass, 4 is your best bet.
Any other comments out in the audience? Any other comments that council members want to make?
Yeah, I think it's scary when you look at the number 7 for you to vote on it, and then you're just like, oh, that's overwhelming. and looking at it a little lower isn't like, oh, you know, you're not gonna have a heart attack.
Well, that's what we're trying to
Yeah.
eliminate, the
I think
chances of
that's
you having a
why
heart
the
attack.
other ones weren't going, because everybody's like, oh, well,
We don't wanna increase our run rates over.
yeah.
All right, then, I want everybody at home that's watching to understand we will be addressing this at the July 9th meeting. And I would ask council to look at, based on their calendars, I did a little bit of searching as to dates because of the time frame that the auditor's office said it would take. It looks to me like we probably ought to be shooting for around July 23rd, somewhere in that range, for another special council meeting. I'm not setting a date, I'm just telling you based on the turnaround that we've got to do.
July 23rd would be our normal finance committee meeting, just like tonight was. So it could easily be transferred to that. I think 3 of your council people plan on the fourth Wednesday of the month. It's the other ones that would have to weigh in.
I will not be available after the 21st for a little while, due to a medical thing.
So are you being operated on the
I'll
21st?
have the surgery on the 21st.
In talking to them today, they felt we should be able to get everything taken care of by 23rd. So you actually are being physically operated on the 23rd.
Yes, I will be in the alarm.
Prayers.
Now, is there amount of time?
So what if we just go there?
I'm not changing. Come on down.
Yeah, come to the hospital.
We can hold it in your room.
Your pay for everything.
Is there, and if you're still on anesthesia, yeah, you can call it. July 9th, our
It's
meeting.
our council
Is
meeting.
there amount of time that we have to leave before we have the next meeting? Are we forced
No,
to
you
wait?
can actually change your July meeting to an earlier date, and then we could hold the special meeting. The time frame is a 7 to 10 day turnaround
For them to get it back,
for them to get it back.
the certification.
So that's why we
have that
can't.
back before we-
Since they already have the numbers, I would think it'll be quicker, because they already gave you the
If,
numbers.
if we held the meeting on July 2nd or 3rd, you could look at holding a meeting the 16th or 17th. We've already got a safety meeting on the 1st scheduled.
I'm golfing on the 3rd.
Yeah, that we did that.
The holiday golf outing, I'm done. I won't be here for the
I
3rd.
think what you want to do is possibly move the council meeting from the 9th to the July 2nd. Is
Right.
that what you're saying?
Yeah, that one, yeah.
July 2nd, we're open for everybody? It's okay for me.
Would that be
July
a
2nd,
full
yeah.
council meeting with everything that goes along
We
with it?
also have that public meeting regarding our budget.
Oh, that's right.
Scheduled prior to the council meeting on the 9th.
Yeah.
That'll
That
be
is
8
that
days.
second, guys.
I bet we can get that back by the 9th. If you have your meeting, your first meeting on the 2nd, it'll be 8 days.
Yeah.
We have enough contact, I think we can get that.
That's
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
The second does not work.
Why?
Kevin's out of town.
Oh,
What about July 1st? With the public safety.
Public safety committee meeting, but we could always have to cancel.
Or we can skip that.
Kevin's out of
Between
town
now-
that week.
That's next week, guys. That's next week.
Between now, the next 3 weeks are gonna be really busy. Figure out what.
Can you still have it at the end of June?
That's now.
That's true.
Would July 7th and July 18th or 17th work for everyone?
July 7th will work for me.
It won't work for me.
July 8th and July 17th?
July 8th is my birthday. If you're gonna do it on July 8th, I like yellow gold. I really like chocolate cupcakes. So if you wanna do it on my birthday, you gotta come with the treat.
Would the 8th and 17th work for everyone?
The 17th
Can
is
we
the,
need all
Or
members
just keep the
present?
ninth,
Um,
since we already have our public meeting, we still have to have a meeting on the ninth.
Does everybody have to
I
be here? Can we
advertised
do it on the second?
We still have to have a meeting on the ninth.
guys, Cindy's got a point here we cannot ignore. And because she's already advertised
For the public budget hearing at 5:45,
Ninth is locked.
on the ninth,
What is anybody available?
5:45. Or 6:45 for council.
What about July 18th?
Friday.
Right,
For
for the,
the second meeting,
yes.
For the meeting.
Our council meeting will be as scheduled on July 9th. Then we'll have the special meeting July 18th.
And we'll have the information back that we need.
I'm gonna,
I think
I'm
so.
going to call them again tomorrow.
And when's your birthday?
July 8th.
That'll give you 9 days.
Yeah, I
That's that to the whole world. Don't
I
guess
think
how
they
old I
can get
am.
it to us as long as we can agree on the amount on the ninth. And I'll get it down then to the morning of the 10th. And beg them to have it, so that we can act on it on the 18th.
Do all council members need to be present?
I think you can have one missing
I think one,
and still have a quorum.
yeah, I think it's because of the way we'll have to pass it as an emergency.
So you still can have one missing
Yeah, I
and
think
do that,
we can have one.
as long as there's no protest vote.
Is any,
So,
you can't be here the 18th.
I can be here the 18th.
So you were gonna miss the next council meeting anyway.
Does
But I
does the 18th not work for? Is everyone outside of fire planning to be present on the 9th?
Yes, I am.
Kevin, when are you gonna be gone?
Is anyone unavailable on the 18th? I think that we stick with the 9th, we'll have 5 of 6, and then the 18th will be a full council. Will that work for everyone? And this will be a special council meeting?
There's still has to be a
The 9th won't be.
Yeah,
But
the
yeah,
18th will be a special council meeting. I'm gonna set
and
this
you
up.
can restrict the agenda.
It's just gonna be that one item.
What time are we looking for?
We'll do 7.
7 p.m.
Friday night. If you wanna do earlier, it doesn't matter.
I work till 6.
Okay, 7. Say 7 to 8. I just put it on the official calendar. Should be on all of your calendars. I'll give it to Ms. Williams tomorrow.
Okay. So we have that set. Now I'd like to pass out to the council members, as we've got that piece of business finished. I want to pass out to you an invoice that I had Mr. Knapp send me today. This is for 2 properties that we abated. And right now I want to look at, we talked about this at the last council meeting, putting an allocation aside to pay for these things. Because if you take a look at the invoices I just sent, we have 2 properties, 100 Mount Depot and 401 Porter.
Yeah.
For those of you that did not see either of those properties, the grass was just high. Residents were concerned about the fact that there were animals infesting it, snakes. So we went ahead and cleaned up those properties, and it's going to cost, for example, on the, you can see as you run down this thing, for 223 Bassett Street, okay, it was $404.50, and the invoice for Mount Depot was $380.68. Today, we met with our village attorney about the property on the estate. That property has been condemned. It is a danger to our residents or any of the homeless that might go there. it has been an ongoing problem. When Mr. Walters was on council, that was one he was concerned about. We are going to start cutting that property every week. And I think Justin is going to go ahead and look for funds to demolish the property if the property owner who's been unresponsive doesn't bring it back into code. So what I'm suggesting is, because we do have these properties that have to be addressed, they're a safety concern and they're a health concern. I would like to move or ask for a motion to move money into an account for abatement, which we will then be trying to put on later this year onto the property taxes to collect. I would like to set aside $20,000. I don't plan on spending $20,000, but we've got to have money in there. And a lower amount's fine too, but we've got to have money to take care of these issues set aside. One of the properties that would have cost over $5,000 to abate, I think in our most recent Board of Zoning Appeals, they've done the corrections, I think, to the satisfaction of Ed and to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So we're not going to have that. But that one would have cost us close to $5,000. So depending on whether people comply, we could be spending money. I just want to have it set aside so it's there when we have these issues.
I would like to propose potentially 10,000 being set aside for now. We can always add to it.
Is tonight's meeting advertised as a special council
And
meeting?
this was on the,
Was it on there? Okay.
Just $10,000, I think, gets started. And I just want to make sure that these amounts that our maintenance crew did, we will be reimbursed when we put an assessment on the property taxes and they pay it.
that's correct.
So it could be 2 or 3 years from now, but we could get paid back.
Yes, and what will happen in September is we will have to pass a resolution for all the properties on that list. And then we can determine whether we want it paid in the first half of the year or the second half of the year. That'll be a choice council will have to make.
Yeah, we've done that. We did that in the past.
Yeah, so, yes,
Were these houses vacant?
I'm sorry.
Were these 2 houses vacant?
One is into foreclosure, I believe. Okay, the other one I can't speak to.
Porter
The gentleman died, I know that.
That's what I
Porter
thought.
Street is in foreclosure. The gentleman is still living there.
Yes.
I don't know about the mountain of that.
But when the assessment is paid, it goes back into the general fund.
It would.
So, I mean, it does go back to where we took it from. I'd like to start out with 10,000, to be honest. That's my thoughts.
I'm good with that.
So you want to make a motion to that?
I'll make a motion that we set aside $10,000. The treasurer can take it from wherever she thinks it needs to be moved from to handle the costs of abatement on properties that need maintenance and upkeep.
I'll second that motion.
Motion made by Mrs. Bolton, and a second was made by Ms. Meister. And any further discussion from council? Justin, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bolton,
Yay.
Ms. Meister,
Yes.
Ms. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Sanderson,
Yes.
Mr. Burns.
Motion passes 5-0. Now I have a motion to adjourn.
I made so moved.
Motion to adjourn by Mrs. Bolton. Is there a second? No second? Oh, second, okay. By Ms. Meister? Meyer? Can't hear. Any further discussion? Justin, call the roll, please.
All right. Mr. Burns.
Yes.
Ms. Sanderson.
Yes.
Ms. Meyer.
Yes.
Ms. Meister.
Yes.
Ms. Bolton.
Yay.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight.